Howdy, Ags! We are back today with Dale Rice, Director of Journalism Studies here at Texas A&M University. In our last episode, Mr. Rice discussed journalism as a career. Today we'll be talking with him about how to write a news story. Here's what Mr. Rice had to say about news writing.
If we're going to talk about news writing in general, the first thing that I would say about news writing is it is a very different form of writing than a student has been used to before. If you come into my classes and you are taking the media writing course, one of the things that I'm going to force students to do is, in a sense, leave a lot of the kinds of things that they have learned at the door. And one of the best examples of that is conclusions. You know, most times when you are writing in college, you are really leading toward a conclusion that you are offering. In news writing, the exact opposite occurs. If you put a conclusion in there, which is opinion no matter how well supported, it will be to the detriment of your grade, because that is one of the most important things that you end up having to learn as a journalist, is that you need to leave your bias out of the story and try and be as fair and impartial as you possibly can be. So you think about that and you think about, well, we're dealing with a bit of a different writing style. Earlier, I alluded to that with the fact that in a news story, especially, we write with the idea of getting, in a sense, top-loading the story with all of the really vital facts. And within those vital facts are those 5 W's, the who, what, where, when, and why. And we want to get those high into any story. And then we want to expound on those with less important information as we move through the piece. Within news writing, our introduction to a story we call a lead. And in a lead, we want to get the reader's attention. We want to tell you the most important, essential element right there, and we want to do it relatively succinctly. We don't want to give you 80 or 100 words summation if we can give you a 25 or 30 word summation. So the emphasis is on how well can we do it in a brief, succinct way that will let you understand the very essence of what we're going to talk about in this story. So you want a good lead put onto a story, and then within the business we have something we call the nut graph, which is a paragraph that has all of the context of this story, that tells you the bigger picture aspect of the story and why, as a reader, I should continue to read on. What is there about this subject that should make me continue to read this story? And that's a paragraph that usually comes in somewhere between the 3rd and 6th paragraphs of a story, that kind of pulls everything together and gives the reader that necessary context.
And what goes in between that, the lead and the nut graph?
Well, really the lead can be followed immediately by the nut graph, and then what you do is you have, in a sense, all of the, if you think about any good story is going to be filled with supporting facts. And it's going to have the quotes, for example, of people involved in the issue. It's going to have other pertinent aspects that may be less important than the summation that you have in the lead, but they give you a good indication or give you additional information about what's happening. For example, I guess one perfect local example right now, Bryan is in the search for a new police chief. At some point, there's going to be an announcement, here is a new police chief in Bryan. So, what are you going to do in that lead? You're going to say that the city has selected a new police chief, and you're going to give the name of that person. In the next couple of paragraphs, as supporting information for that lead, you're going to tell who made the decision, why that happened. You're going to move on to a nut graph, and that's going to give you some context. So you're going to say, well, this is going to be the 7th police chief for Bryan in 7 years. And the city has been looking to end a lot of turmoil and trying to do it with the selection of a new person. And then for the rest of the story, you get to quote the city manager and the mayor and the new police chief and the citizens about what they think this person, the kind of job this person will do. You get to put the background information in about the person. You're going to tell what background in policing is, and probably even some personal details about his education and his family life, and where he grew up and other cities he's worked in, those kinds of things. And then you're going to finally wrap up with probably some of the least important information, which is, again, the reaction of people who are only tangentially involved and what they think about it. But that, I hope, gives you a little bit of an illustration how you actually work through a story from the specifics to the really key elements to less important things that are part of that.
Now that you have been given the structure for writing a news story, how about some practice? Sign up for Dale Rice's Media Writing 1 and 2 classes, where you will learn how to write a news story on deadline. Speaking of deadlines, in our next episode, Dale Rice will discuss the importance of being able to write on deadline. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of Write Right. We'll see you next time.